Now, we'll move on to an area in the middle of the brain, the median section. Again, you see here an image of the median surface. And this is the corpus callosum. You see the bundle of fibers that are familiar to you by now. But we've got inside here a number of different Brodmann's area that we've considered to get already in this lecture. So here's number 6, here's number 8, and so forth. Here's number 7. So we've got a number of different identifiable Brodmann's areas that are seen here from the medial view. Now, in this particular slide, there's a couple of parts of the interior surface of the brain that I want to point out to you. One of the regions is the cingulate cortex. Cingulate refers to turning in on itself. In other words, it refers to a kind of spiraling of the cortical structure so that it has this round appearance. And if we take a look at the cingulate here in different sections, you can see that it's got that look to it. It actually comes around the corpus callosum, which has also got that circular appearance. So the cingulate is this bundle of nerve cells that surrounds and encircles the corpus callosum. So cingulate could be referred to as encircle. That's a good way to remember it. But in the cingulate we have a number of different regions, and you can see here that the different colors refer to different sections of the cingulate cortex. And of course, to make the point again to you about the Brodmann's area, you'll notice that although Brodmann's area 24 and 32 are cellularly, they're different in cellular structure, that's why they have different numbers. Actually, they're both a part of this cingular cortex, and the same thing is true of area 31, 30, and so forth. Now, again, we've got another layer here of neuroanatomy that is important to try to understand. I'm giving the cingulate cortex here as an example, but this is true in many other parts of the brain. You don't need to know all of those, as this course is not designed to teach you to become neuroanatomists. But in any case, I want to make the point that we've got a number of different categories for the cingulate cortex. We've got a superordinate category, which is simply the term cingulate. So that's the superordinate term for this entire bundle of fibers here. But within the cingulate, we've got divisions, and these are divisions that respond to position. So we've got an anterior portion here, anterior cingulate cortex. We've got a mid-cingulate area here. We've got a posterior cingulate here, and we've got the retrosplenial cingulate. This is because the splenium of the corpus callosum is located here. That's the back section of the corpus callosum here. This is an area that unfortunately can show developmental agenesis. That means the splenium doesn't develop. But I digress, because the name retrosplenial simply refers to its location relative to the corpus callosum and the splenium of the corpus callosum. So the divisions of the cingulate are nothing more than different geographical locations: front, middle, back. So in some sense they're simply arbitrary. They're not tied to any particular function as far as we know yet. They're not tied to any particular cellular structure, although we do see some overlap with Brodmann's area 32 and the anterior, and Brodmann's area 24 and the mid-cingulate, and Brodmann's area 31 and the posterior, and retrosplenial and Brodmann's area 30. Don't make the mistake, though, of assuming that the Brodmann's area is equivalent to the divisions. It's not. Within each division, we have different Brodmann's areas, which means that there are different cellular types. But it's important to keep in mind that these categories need to be separated. Divisions, cellular types, and the superordinate category of the cingulate. It turns out that the cingulate is critical for all kinds of cognitive performance, particularly decision making. And when we do brain imaging studies, such as fMRI, we generally always find that the cingulate shows some greater activation relative to other areas of the brain if a task involves some kind of decision. And that's generally the case for all psycholinguistic tasks. For example, we might ask somebody to look at a word on a screen while they're in the scanner, and the word would be sometimes a word, but half the time a non-word, a word that doesn't exist in the language. And the decision for the participant is whether the stimulus they see is a word or a non-word. And the decision that's made we call a lexical decision. And this is a very standard task for psycholinguistics. In the case of identifying where in the brain we might recognize Chinese compared to English, we use lexical decision performed in Chinese or in English to ask if the same areas act in both languages. There is in fact some evidence that lexical decision for Chinese and lexical decision for English in bilingual speakers is very, very similar. We find that the cingulate cortex, for example, is active for both languages during lexical decision, which suggests that there is not much language differentiation in terms of cingulate itself, the decision-making process. By contrast, if we look at studies that compare monolingual Chinese with monolingual English speakers, that is, speaking only one language or the other, we do find some differences where it appears that monolingual Chinese speakers seem to activate the right hemisphere more than the left, and conversely, monolingual English speakers tend to activate the left hemisphere more than the right. So there are conflicting research studies on that question, but the point here is to illustrate that the cingulate cortex is intimately involved in cognitive processing at the level of decision making, and therefore is relevant to understanding neurolinguistics of language processing.